Hello there, friends. Welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. Let's say you're in the Rebel Army, in a unit like the 61st Mobile Infantry. You're battle-hardened, having engaged the Imperial Army on several planets, and even on the close confines of starships. You've lost friends, you've taken shrapnel in your knee, but more or less, you are a professional soldier. And when Imperial levy forces or non-combatants surrender, you generally treat people fairly. You follow the protocols established by the New Republic government. But when you run into an Imperial Stormtrooper, the situation kind of changes. Oftentimes, if you are actually able to take one alive as a prisoner, the best course of action seems to be to execute them. What do you guys think about that? Because from a moral and legal point of view, executing or killing a surrendered prisoner is a bad thing, and in our own world it is considered a war crime. And most likely under the New Republic and Galactic Republic's reign, it was also a war crime. And this makes sense. I understand why policymakers and military leaders would try to create some kind of structure, some type of rule to make warfare less chaotic and a little bit more predictable and less destructive. The First Geneva Convention in 1864 in our own timeline was focused on a pretty simple set of principles. Wounded soldiers needed to be cared for no matter what side they're on. Medical personnel in hospitals should not be targeted, and the Red Cross symbol was adopted as a universal sign of medical services. But the Industrial Revolution over time would drastically change how wars were fought. There would be rapid advancements in small arms technology, artillery. We saw a plethora of new war machines being invented, airplanes, submarines, battleships, tanks. Things got really quickly out of hand. That combined with new extreme political ideologies like fascism and communism and huge economic upheaval created a brutality and chaos that no one was prepared for. 2 consecutive world wars almost brought our planet to the brink. And in 1949, a few years after World War II ended, the Geneva Conventions would be updated, adding new protections with a specific focus on the treatment of prisoners of war, banning their execution and torture. The great cost of those conflicts led to progress. We started valuing the individual. We started valuing human life with far more respect. The First World War destroyed the old aristocracy. World War I was very much like a family affair. Monarchs armed with new toys sending their people into waves to die. But this time, there were consequences for them. Instead of armies of mercenaries and peasant conscripts, military forces were increasingly made up of mass-deployed civilian populaces. Governments became less rigid and more democratic and therefore accountable to voters and the families of soldiers. I mean, this is what these rules are created for, right? If word gets around that your military force is going around executing surrendered prisoners, what do you think that does to your own people? It puts them into danger. Not only does it make the enemy fight harder, prolonging engagements and making surrender less likely, it also puts your soldiers in a tough situation where they're given less opportunities to surrender as well. It was rules like this, along with advancements in battlefield medicine and logistics, that greatly reduce casualty numbers between the 2 world wars, and that's a trend that hopefully continues today. The Rebel Alliance also faced a similar reality on the ground. This wasn't a war against tyranny, it was also a civil war. Brothers fighting brothers, neighbors killing neighbors. The oppression of the Empire was horrific, but how the Sith ripped apart communities was even more savage. Palpatine was focused on dividing the populace. He wanted the galaxy to be too busy fighting each other in order to understand what he was doing. And, he rewarded Imperials who served beneath him with great wealth and power. But the trade-off is these Imperials had to oppress their own people, sometimes their own family members, making the conflict even more brutal and personal. Mon Mothma understood what Palpatine's government was up to. She was fully aware that the more ruthless her forces were, the more Imperials would rally around their flag. With groups like the Partisans carrying out indiscriminate attacks on Imperial civilian targets and executing surrendered combatants, it was becoming harder to control the narrative of what the rebellion stood for. If anything, Shaw's partisans' actions supported the narrative that the Empire was trying to spin about the rebellion, that they were in fact a group of armed thugs, criminals, and terrorists. And it doesn't really matter if the majority of rebel troopers conducted themselves in the right manner. News of massacres of horrific crimes traveled much further and much quicker. Mon Mothma didn't need to focus on tactical or even operational victories. She had military leaders to do that for her. What she wanted to focus on was the hearts and minds of the citizens of the Empire. She wanted to offer them an alternative to what honestly was a pretty reality for most people. A lot of these people were ready to embrace rebellion, to fight for liberty. And so the worst thing you could do was to accidentally bomb these people or hurt them, which is, again, what the partisans often did. And after the Battle of Endor, Mon Mothma already started planning for the end of the war, and by the Battle of Jakku, the rebellion was heavily focused on opening up facilities to process Imperial defectors. Mon Mothma would grant a general amnesty for most Imperial service members in an effort to bring a quick end to the conflict. It was an extreme policy, very naive in some ways. We had Imperial infiltrators working for ex-ISB agents fully integrate themselves into the New Republic. There are many accounts of Stormtroopers lining up in these, processing centers and detonating suicide belts, killing other Imperials who are trying to surrender. This really does highlight one of the problems with Mon Mothma's plan. While most Imperial personnel were willing to give up peacefully and be rehabilitated so that they could become citizens of the galaxy, some units were just too fanatic. In the beginning of the war, the rebellion mostly engaged Imperial Army units. These were usually made up of local citizens. At the end of the Clone Wars, the Empire consolidated many local and planetary defense forces into the Imperial Army. These soldiers were mostly garrison forces that focused on local defense and were generally more loyal to their own planet than the federal government in a lot of cases. These were not extremely ideological units. They were not indoctrinated in the way the Stormtrooper Corp or the ISB was. But after the Aldhani heist and the public order decree, the composition of the Imperial military started to shift. We see the Stormtrooper Corps expand in size greatly. We see ISB political agents take over operations usually handled by career officers in the military. These were organizations personally loyal to Palpatine, and they were capable of horrific acts of brutality. We know what happened on Lasat. We saw what happened on Gorman. We also know about Lothal. We know about Jeddah and Alderaan. These were not military targets that Palpatine was engaging. He was killing civilians. Entire cities were being destroyed. Entire planets wiped out. So I ask you again, if you're a rebel trooper and you somehow manage to capture a stormtrooper and you take their helmet off, and the second you do that, they start spitting at you and yelling wild profanities, what do you do? What do you do to them? Well, from what we know, rebel troopers, especially during the Mid-Rim retreat, when resources were limited and things were extremely chaotic, rebel troopers were known for executing Imperial soldiers, specifically stormtroopers. I mean, a unit like the Twilight Company legitimately lacked the manpower and space to actually take on prisoners. Twilight Company was a self-contained unit based off of a CR-90. Everyone was already double bunking. Most of the support staff were already fighting as infantry. And let's say you need, one guard for every 5 prisoners you take, that severely limits your fighting force's capabilities. And since the rebels were typically outnumbered and had to stay mobile, that made the situation even more dangerous. If you're holding prisoners in the rear, that's one thing. If you're holding prisoners in an active combat zone, it's very likely those prisoners could escape or even steal weapons and turn them against you. And if you have some fanatic stormtroopers in custody, that makes the situation even crazier. This is a common problem a lot of militaries face all throughout our own history. In World War II, Allied forces engaged in this activity as well. During the Battle of Normandy, in order to stop German reinforcements from swarming the fragile beachhead created by the invasion force, paratrooper units were scattered all across the countryside the night before, and it was immensely difficult for these units to actually hold on to prisoners. These guys were basically dismounted light infantry. The second they hit the ground, they didn't have vehicles, they didn't have camps or anything like that. They were being hunted in a lot of cases by the defensive forces in the Norman countryside. And so if they did manage to capture people for tactical purposes, they could not hold on to them as prisoners. It was very difficult. Now, it should be noted that the killing of prisoners by Allied forces was not systematic and usually situational. There were never orders from high command to not take prisoners or to kill prisoners. The Axis powers, on the other hand, Imperial Japan and Nazi Germany, did execute prisoners of war in far larger numbers and a more systematic scale. The Nazis were especially brutal against the Soviets. The Japanese were arguably even more brutal against the Chinese. And these soldiers who committed these atrocities, well, a lot of times they were following orders that came down from the command chain. This is similar to how the Galactic Empire also engaged in widespread execution and killing of rebel fighters and also civilians. And so while both sides did execute prisoners, there is an important difference between how the Allies and the Axis approach things, how the Rebellion and the Galactic Empire approach things. Cynics will say otherwise, but the truth is, this kind of behavior in warfare probably will never be completely eliminated. the best you can hope for is to create some rules, some structure, so that you can limit this kind of behavior and prevent it from being rampant. And as mentioned before, the horrific actions of Axis forces, the systematic cruelty they endure further endangered their own soldiers as well. In 1945, as American GIs started encountering concentration camps for the first time in their campaign at Dachau and Buchenwald, it was shocking what they witnessed. You could smell the bodies and corpses piled up around the camps from miles away, and the few survivors they encountered were so starved that they were essentially just skin and bones, walking skeletons. This was a turning point for American soldiers, and it fueled hatred and rage that didn't necessarily exist on the Western Front of the war prior to this. And there were many cases of American GIs gunning down SS units and camp guards, or just standing by as emancipated prisoners beat their captors to death. I find it especially hard to judge these actions. Can you rehabilitate a person who sends babies, children and women into gas chambers? I'm willing to accept that the average German was swept up in the larger events that turned the world upside down. But there really is no defense for the SS, the camp guards. There is no way back for them to normal society. And if you let them survive, if you let them filter back in, they become sores that fester and create problems down the road. This is why I hate this modern trend where we label anything we don't like as fascist or Nazis. This is a very serious word, and when you label someone that, there really is no coming back from it. And I have to think that for a lot of rebel troopers, this mentality was the same when they capture stormtroopers. There is this rage and hatred that infantry soldiers are sometimes consumed by because of the sheer cruelty they witness from their enemies. But there is also this understanding that some of these Imperials they encountered, these stormtroopers, these ISB agents, there was no redemption for them. These were dangerous people. You couldn't just let them go back into society. Fanatics, true evil. It taints everything it touches. It forces otherwise reasonable people to have to make horrific and difficult decisions in order to protect themselves and the things they love. And sometimes these people also become evil and fanatic themselves. It's like a disease. It's like a virus. This is the truth about large, widespread conflict. This is why I hate extremism. This is why I don't like the glorification of violence and war. It is so important that we continue to talk to each other. It's so important to try to eliminate these extreme views, these irrational purity tests that we try to give each other, especially as Americans. I mean, we are blessed as a country. This land is full of resources and wealth that no other nation has. There's plenty of room and there's plenty to go around. Our neighbors to the north and south are great allies and friends. We have no true threat except for the threat of the Union breaking apart. There's no situation our country cannot get out of as long as we are working together. We need to remember that. Unlike so many oppressed people in the world, we still have the ability to vote, to change our elected officials, to change our government through peaceful ways. It is extremely important that we cherish this right that so many Americans before us have sacrificed their lives to defend. Well guys, I hope you enjoyed today's video. Don't forget to subscribe, hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, my name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy. I'll see you next time.